That question, whispered once in a quiet barracks of some forgotten regimental camp, was enough to make every soldier in earshot fall silent. Not because they didn't know the answer, but because they didn't want to know it. In the sprawling nightmare that is the Imperium of man, where hope is currency no one can afford and faith is the only oxygen left to breathe, there are rumors darker than heresy and truths more terrifying than demons. The insane Asylums of Warhammer 40K, officially called Sanatoria Correctionum, were one such truth. Not prisons, not hospitals, not punishment, not mercy. Something else. Something whose name has been erased, rewritten, and hidden beneath centuries of bureaucratic dust and blood. The Imperium claims these institutions heal the fractured mind, restoring loyal citizens to purity and purposeful service. The words are clean, sterile, approved, yet those who have seen the facilities, those few who returned long enough to speak, scream, or claw at their own skin, describe something far different. They speak of voices that never stop, hallways that seem to breathe, and orderlies who never blink. They speak of the smell, disinfectant mixed with something warm and metallic, and how the walls appear to sweat in the dark. And when they speak too much, they are taken back. And this time, no one sees them again. It is said that madness is common in the Imperium. How could it not be? Imagine living under the watchful gaze of a corpse god who demands your faith while never returning your prayers. Imagine serving in wars you do not understand against enemies you will never truly see. Imagine discovering that every nightmare you feared as a child is real, and hungry, and your planet is nothing but a lunch break. Sanity is a fragile glass in Warhammer 40K, and the galaxy delights in stones. But those who shatter in the wrong direction, who ask forbidden questions, who see things behind their eyelids at night, who cannot stop trembling when the lights go out, are quietly escorted away. The asylum is not for the broken. It is for the inconvenient. To be declared insane is not a diagnosis. It is a verdict. It means you have seen too much, or remembered too much, or refused to forget. The administratum writes down your name. The Inquisition stamps a seal beside it, and you vanish. But here is the secret no citizen dares to utter: the asylums do not exist to treat the mind. They exist to harvest it. Because within the Imperium, every soul is a resource, every body is labor, every belief is fuel. But the mind, fragile, unpredictable, haunted, contains something the Imperium desperately needs. Not intelligence, not memories. Something deeper, something ancient, something that once belonged solely to the warp. Some believe these asylums were built to control the spread of madness, but others whisper the opposite, that they were built to contain something that hungers for it. Something that prowls the psychic cracks of damaged minds like a predator testing the bars of its cage. And every scream echoing through those dark hallways is just another piece of it rattling loose. Soldiers share these rumors in hushed tones when the night is too still and the stars look like watching eyes. They speak of sanitized corridors that lead down and down and down into forgotten vaults older than the Imperium itself. Of patients who speak languages they never learned. Of shadows that crawl up the walls instead of down. They speak of doctors who never grow older and machines that run long after the power grid dies. But the thing they whisper most quietly, the thing that makes even hardened veterans look over their shoulder, is this: the asylum chooses who enters. Some feel its pull days before they are taken, a sense of being watched, of being followed, of whispers curling behind their thoughts like mildew. Some wake with scratches they don't remember inflicting. Some dream of white rooms and steel tables long before they ever see one. And when the day finally arrives, when uniformed enforcers arrive without sirens or warnings, there is never a struggle. The chosen simply stare, as if they always knew this day was coming, and walk willingly into the waiting dark. No records return with them. No families receive notice. No one files forms for their absence. They are erased as if they never existed. And maybe, that is the safest mercy the Imperium ever gives. Because those who are not forgotten, those whose names remain, even whispered, also remain in the memories of the asylum itself. And memories are the one thing that building feeds on without ever choking. But the question now hangs in the air like drifting smoke, dangerous, poisonous, forbidden. If no one escapes the asylum, then how do we know what happens inside? And the answer comes not from the Imperium, not from records, not from witnesses. It comes from something far stranger, and far more terrifying than a survivor. Because some voices return, not in body, not in sanity, but in messages. Unclaimed voxes, scrambled data slates, recordings that were never meant to be played, echoes that should not exist. And the first of those echoes begins with a whisper that has driven many listeners to claw at their ears until their nails snapped. The doors were locked from the inside. Think about that for a moment, because if that were true, it would mean the asylum isn't just a place where people are taken. It would mean it is a place that speaks back. And if you stay with this story until the very end, you'll understand something about the Imperium that most citizens die without ever hearing. Consider it your reward for surviving the journey, one that others, well, didn't. The message that changed everything began not on a battlefield, nor in a throne room of power, but in the quiet static of a malfunctioning Vox console aboard a weather-beaten transport ship drifting on the fringes of Imperial space. A routine salvage crew, low-ranking, unnoticed, disposable, reported hearing voices through dead frequencies. Not unusual. The warp has a sense of humor. But these words weren't demonic growls, nor incoherent screams. They were calm, spoken, human, terrifyingly so. A voice, strained but articulate, repeating coordinates in a rhythm that never faltered. Those coordinates led to nothing on any map, no planet, no station, not even recorded debris. The administratum declared it a glitch, closed the report, and ordered silence. But silence is fragile, especially when curiosity becomes louder than caution. One of the crew, an engineer named Merrick, couldn't let it go. Night after night, he returned to the empty frequency. And each night, the voice added one more sentence. Not a plea for rescue. Not a warning. It wasn't an escape. It was an opening. Merrick barely slept. He scribbled symbols like he was remembering them rather than inventing them. He kept his cabin sealed. When others called his name, he didn't respond, because he no longer trusted the voices that used his friends' mouths. His last act was sending a fragmented data packet off the ship through a private channel before vanishing. And vanished is the perfect word, because the cameras watching his cabin went dark for only 3 seconds, and when they flickered back on, the room was empty. No blood, no struggle, no body. Just the Vox console, still emitting that calm, steady voice, saying coordinates that no longer existed. Weeks later, the ship docked at a waystation. Investigators boarded. They left with one conclusion. Merrick never left the asylum. He was simply reclaimed. Now, here's where the questions get dangerous, because the asylum had no record of him. No document, no transfer. Yet the voice knew his full name, his home world, his childhood squad designation. Details buried under decades of Imperial paper and ash. So how did the asylum know him? How did it remember? Perhaps the asylum is not a place where broken minds are discarded. Perhaps it is a place where minds are stored, cataloged, indexed, filed like books in a library no one is ever allowed to read, except those who know exactly what they're looking for. And that begs a darker question than any other. Who, or what, is reading? But to understand the answer, we must go back. Further than the Imperium's birth. Further than the Age of Strife. To a time before the Emperor walked the cradle of Terra, when another force ruled the thoughts of humankind from the shadows. A force patient enough to wait. Silent enough to hide. And hungry enough to never stop feeding. The Imperium is many things, brutal, absolute, unyielding, but one thing it never is original. Almost everything it claims to own, wield, or understand, it inherited from a darker age and slapped its name across the front like a freshly printed seal of approval. The truth is far more ancient and far more unsettling. Before the Emperor, before the Age of Strife, before recorded history even learned how to write fear, the Asylum existed. It was not called an asylum then. It had no name mortals could speak. The earliest humans to stumble upon it believed it a temple, huge stone corridors carved with symbols no chisel had ever cut. They thought it sacred, a sanctuary, a gift. They entered with torches, prayers, and curiosity. None left with sanity. Legends say their voices echoed through the stone long after their bodies decayed, and that the walls listened, absorbing their terror the way dry earth absorbs rain. When the Emperor rose, uniting terror through fire and blood, his forces found the remnants of this structure during a campaign lost in the erasure of time. The site was covered, not hidden, buried by centuries of soil trying desperately to forget what slept beneath. The Emperor examined it, as he did every anomaly of the old world, and the accounts say that for the first and last time, he hesitated. Not feared, not doubted, just hesitated, like a man reading a book that suddenly begins reading him back. The ruins were sealed, guarded, classified. For centuries, no one touched them. But time corrodes more than metal, it corrodes patience. And when the Imperium's appetite for control outgrew its caution, they returned. The ruins were excavated, expanded, industrialized. Humanity did what humanity always does, it reshaped horror into infrastructure. The first Imperial Sanatoria Correctionum wasn't built, it was grafted onto something incomprehensible. And soon after, the reports began. Patients admitted for mild trauma describing dreams of impossible architecture, infinite hallways spiraling downward, chambers pulsing like organic lungs. Orderlies going missing without leaving their post. Whispered voices echoing through empty ducts. Doors locking themselves. But the truly horrifying part wasn't what escaped the ruins, it was what answered back. Psychic amplification, shared hallucinations, collective nightmares. The Imperium realized something devastating. The broken mind served as a doorway. The more fractured the psyche, the wider the gate. Trauma was not the disease the asylum treated, it was the currency it required. Each patient, each damaged soul, was a gift-wrapped offering that the warp was all too eager to accept. And in return, the asylum granted the Imperium something priceless. Not power, not knowledge. Something far more valuable, obedience. Because if you can break a mind and reshape it, you own it forever. And the Imperium is nothing if not a collector of ownership. But here is the question that keeps High Lords awake behind fortified walls and reinforced faith. If the Asylum feeds the warp, does the warp feed the Asylum back? The answer isn't written in history. It's written in screams, ones no record ever keeps. The Imperium speaks of sanity as if it were a moral obligation. Citizens are expected to be stable, loyal, unquestioning pillars of faith. To doubt is sin. To fear is weakness. To remember what you should have forgotten is a crime worse than treason. But the galaxy is not designed for mental survival. You cannot witness demons claw their way through reality, hear the whispers of the warp through dreams, watch planets devoured or worlds burn, and remain whole. Yet the Imperium demands it anyway. The moment a mind shows fissures, shaking hands, sleepless eyes, questions whispered to no one, someone notices. A neighbor, a coworker, a superior. All it takes is one suspicion, and the wheels of bureaucracy begin grinding with mechanical indifference. A form submitted here, a signature there, a file stamped red, and suddenly, the person is no longer a citizen. They are a case, a number, a transport assignment. The clerks never ask where those assignments led. They don't want to know. Because the worst truth is always the simplest. Fear keeps the Imperium running. Fear of Xenos. Fear of heresy. Fear of corruption. Fear of madness. The Asylums weaponize that fear, not against enemies, but against the very people they swear to protect. They promise treatment, but treatment is not the purpose. Treatment suggests recovery. The Asylum's goal is not recovery, it is containment. Or perhaps more accurately, extraction. Those locked within are not patients, they are resources. Their trauma, their terror, their unraveling thoughts, all become data points for forces the Imperium cannot fully control but believes it can bargain with. Psychers are the most obvious victims, but not the only ones. Ordinary citizens, ravaged by grief, loss, or visions after surviving a battlefield, serve an equal function. Broken minds make better channels. To the Imperium, the Asylum is a filter. To the inmates, it is a sentence. To the warp, it is an invitation. And the warp always RSVPs. Some inmates awaken after their first night unable to speak, tongues bitten through, throats raw from silent screams. Others refuse to sleep entirely, convinced that if they close their eyes, someone, no, something, will take their place before morning. A few simply sit, motionless, staring at walls that are perfectly clean, yet dripping in their eyes. But the most disturbing are the ones who smile, who speak calmly, politely, greeting staff by name before the staff introduces themselves. Those are the patients everyone avoids, because those are the ones the Asylum has already changed. And the Imperium does not fear the broken. It fears the remade, because obedience is useful, loyalty is necessary, but a mind rebuilt by something other than human hands, that is not a victory. That is a seed planted in silence, watered with nightmares, harvested when the galaxy least expects it. And the Asylum, ancient, patient, listening, has been planting seeds for a very, very long time. The Imperium insists no inmate has ever walked back through its gates. Officially, the phrase, "no one leaves," is not a threat, it is a point of pride. Proof of efficiency. Proof of control. But buried beneath layers of propaganda and doctrine lies a disturbing truth the administratum will never inscribe. There are returnees. Not many, not often, and never in the way families hope. They come back as discharged workers, quiet servants, obedient laborers. Their records list, rehabilitation complete, in bold script. They speak when spoken to. They work without complaint. They smile, politely, too politely, at everything. And yet, they remember nothing. Not their friends. Not their childhood. Not even their own reflections. To the naked eye, they resemble humans. To those who once knew them, they resemble placeholders. It starts with the eyes. Not lifeless, no, that would be merciful. Instead, their eyes are too alive. Always watching. Always full of a focus that doesn't belong to the conversation, but seems aimed at something far behind the person they're speaking to, like they are listening to a voice no one else hears. Then comes the silence. Not the normal quiet of a modest citizen. A thick silence. Heavy. Pregnant with words they refuse to speak, or words they are not permitted to speak. Conversations with them feel like talking to a book that has sealed its pages shut. But the real fear begins with the tics, small involuntary moments. Flinching at sounds that aren't there. Turning toward corners that hold no one. Smiling without any cue for joy. Standing awake at night for hours with eyes wide open, as if sleeping is not necessary, or worse, not allowed. Their families report changes, but reports go unanswered. Those who insist too strongly on answers are reminded, brutally, that reopening closed files is akin to reopening old wounds. Dangerous, unnecessary, and punishable. And yet the strangest detail isn't how the returnees act. It is what they never do. They never ask questions. They never raise their voice. They never doubt. Because doubt requires independence. And the Asylum does not return minds that can doubt. Some priests claim these, healed citizens, are proof of the Emperor's mercy, a miracle of restored purpose. But tech priests who have studied neural scans in secret claim something else entirely. Activity in the brain's emotional centers reduced. Memory sectors fragmented. New neural pathways inserted. Not grown. Not healed. Engineered. Which leads to the question that tears sanity at the edges. If something else is thinking for them, where does their mind go? Into the walls. Into the warp. into whatever ancient force the Asylum once served and may still serve. The Imperium believes it controls the Asylums. The Asylums believe otherwise. And the Returnees, those polite, obedient ghosts wearing human faces, are proof of that belief. Because the ones who return are not survivors. They are messengers, silent, patient, everywhere, waiting for the moment the galaxy forgets to fear them. This is not a trivial question. The Inquisition is the hammer of mankind's fear, swift, decisive, merciless. When a cult forms, they burn it. When a planet wavers, they purge it. When whispers grow too loud, they silence them along with the throats that whispered. There are very few things in the galaxy the Inquisition tolerates. Yet the Asylums remain untouched. Operational, funded, expanding. Some Inquisitors, even entire Ordos, have tried to shut them down, convinced that no institution should wield such unaccountable power over the human mind. But every attempt ends the same way, with the Inquisitor reassigned, missing, or suddenly endorsing the program they once opposed. Imagine the strongest-willed, sharpest-minded, most zealous defenders of humanity, individuals who have stared demons in the eye and didn't blink, entering the Asylum to investigate. And then leaving as loyal supporters of the very thing they sought to destroy. Not coerced, not threatened, converted, or worse, reconstructed. A rumor circulates through the ranks of those brave, or foolish, enough to discuss it behind locked bulkheads. They say that the Asylums do not resist inquisitorial scrutiny. They welcome it. They open their doors, clear their records, offer full cooperation, as though amused by the intrusion. Because they already know what will happen. They already know the investigator will stay long enough to hear the walls breathe. Long enough to dream dreams that are not their own. Long enough for the Asylum to open them like a book, and write something new on the pages. A few Inquisitors, the rare ones who return unchanged, speak of it only once, in a statement barely above a whisper, before withdrawing from their duties and vanishing into self-imposed exile. Their words always echo the same sentiment. We found nothing, because it found us first. And that is where the fear turns inward. Because if the Inquisition cannot stop the Asylums, if even they are afraid, what force keeps the doors open? Some say the Emperor himself allows it, that these institutions are necessary sacrifices in the eternal war against chaos. Others believe the Asylums are tools of the warp wearing Imperial colors like stolen skin. But the most disturbing possibility is the simplest. The Imperium is not in control of the Asylums. It only thinks it is. The ancient ruins the Imperium built atop were not prisons, they were temples. And temples do not belong to the worshippers. They belong to the God waiting at the altar. What if the Asylums are not healing minds, but offering them? Not containing madness, but feeding on it. Not protecting the Imperium, but preparing it. The Inquisition has a dilemma it will never confess. They do not fear the Asylums because of what happens inside. They fear them because of what might one day come out. And if the returned are merely messengers, silent seeds planted across countless worlds, then what, exactly, are they waiting to bloom? Blueprints and floor plans form the backbone of Imperial infrastructure. Every hallway, every maintenance duct, every sealed vault must exist on record, stamped and approved. But the Asylums of the Imperium are notorious for one trait above all others. No two maps ever match. When engineers arrive for repairs, they cannot find the corridors listed in the schematics. When new wings appear, no construction reports exist, yet the stone is aged, wired, and stained as if it has been there for centuries. Doors relocate. Stairwells descend deeper than the building's foundation. Rooms repeat like mirrors reflecting mirrors, looping into kingdoms of tile and torchlight that should not fit within the physical dimensions of the structure. Investigators once marked a path with paint, bright, dripping streaks of red along the floor to track their route. They walked straight, never turning, and after 6 minutes found themselves back at the entrance, paint trailing behind them like a mocking ribbon. The paint did not loop. The hallway did, More disturbing are the sealed chambers discovered by accident, rooms filled with archaic machinery predating the Imperium, their function unknown yet undeniably active. Devices powered by no generator. Monitors displaying patterns that move like breathing lungs. Occasional whispers from voices that speak no language, yet remain hauntingly intelligible. Some staff insist the asylum is alive, not metaphorically, not poetically, literally alive. That the building rearranges itself the way a body generates new cells, growing where it needs to, sealing away what it has finished with. Patients being wheeled to treatment rooms disappear mid-transport, not vanished into thin air, but simply rerouted into hallways that didn't exist seconds before. And those hallways never lead anywhere good. One unverified account was leaked by a guard whose voice shook even through encrypted logs. He recounted escorting a silent, sedated patient to a ward that should have been 6 doors down. But the hallway stretched longer. The lights flickered to a deeper orange, then red, then a shade he could only describe as wet. The floor softened underfoot, like cartilage. The patient began to smile. Not awake, not aware, just smiling. Then the guard blinked, and he was alone. No doors, no patient, no exit, just the long, breathing corridor. He walked backward until he collided with something solid, the original wall behind him. He reported the incident. He was transferred the next day. His record ends there. What makes this phenomenon terrifying is not just that the asylum grows. It grows with purpose. Every expansion has a theme, a behavior, a hunger, as if responding to the emotional climate of its inhabitants. When psychers are admitted, rooms with reinforced null metal appear. When violent patients fill the cells, padded chambers manifest overnight. When silence becomes unbearable, vents begin carrying faint sobs from floors below. Floors that construction teams swear do not exist. This raises a question that even the bravest minds refuse to write down. Is the asylum housing madness? Or is madness housing the asylum? Because buildings shouldn't grow, walls shouldn't listen, and yet, people claim if you press your ear to the stone and wait, you'll hear it echo. Not voices, footsteps, as if something inside is walking, looking for a way out. In every asylum, there are patients whose minds fracture faster than the rest. Not because they are weaker, but because they see deeper. They perceive things that ordinary humans cannot. A subtle twitch in the walls, a whisper in frequencies that don't exist, shadows that bend at impossible angles. They notice the faint pulse of corridors, the subtle reshaping of halls, the hum of something beneath the floors, always just out of sight. These patients are the ones administrators fear most. They do not scream or cry. They watch, and sometimes, they remember. The stories of these individuals are chilling. One inmate, known only by the number X917, was admitted for minor war trauma. Within hours, he refused to eat, claiming the walls were hungry. Staff dismissed him as unstable. By the third day, his scribbles covered the walls of his cell, diagrams of impossible geometries, symbols that predate the Imperium, and coordinates to locations that do not exist. The asylum took him into observation, and he was never seen again. Others speak in riddles, reciting history that predates human memory, whispering of corridors that breathe and ceilings that fold into infinity. They claim to hear the voices of the building itself, the asylum murmuring secrets older than the emperor's reign. A few have even claimed the asylum communicates directly with them, promising freedom, but freedom in a way the human mind cannot comprehend, freedom that dissolves identity rather than restoring it. But the most terrifying aspect is what happens to the mind of someone who truly understands. They do not simply break, they transform. They retain awareness while their consciousness fragments into 1,000 streams, each tied to a piece of the asylum. In some accounts, these transformed minds become oracles for the building, sent to guide new arrivals, lure the inquisitive, and ensure that no one ever leaves with complete understanding. And yet, a dangerous allure persists. Some who enter the asylum do so willingly, drawn by a compulsion they cannot resist. They are fascinated by the whispers and the shifting architecture, seduced by the idea that there is knowledge hidden within the corridors. Few survive, and those who do emerge changed, with eyes too bright, smiles too calm, and voices that carry a strange echo of something else, something the Asylum has taken, absorbed, and returned. The Imperium suppresses these accounts, erases records, and classifies files to maintain the illusion of control. But word spreads. The haunted whispers of those who vanished, the hints left in abandoned logs, and the voices that sometimes bleed through Vox networks to unprepared listeners, all suggest a terrifying conclusion: the Asylum does not merely contain the insane. It cultivates the extraordinary. It teaches them. It feeds on their understanding. And it remembers them forever. Every patient who sees too much becomes a testament to the Asylum's will. They are warnings, lessons, and sometimes messengers. And the Imperium, for all its power, remains blind to the full scope of the threat, because those who might reveal it are invariably consumed, lost, or transformed before they can speak. For the rest of humanity, the lesson is chillingly clear: to look too closely is to vanish. And to vanish is only the beginning. In every asylum, there are patients whose minds fracture faster than the rest. Not because they are weaker, but because they see deeper. They perceive things that ordinary humans cannot: a subtle twitch in the walls, a whisper in frequencies that don't exist, shadows that bend at impossible angles. They notice the faint pulse of corridors, the subtle reshaping of halls, the hum of something beneath the floors, always just out of sight. These patients are the ones administrators fear most. They do not scream or cry. They watch, and sometimes, they remember. The stories of these individuals are chilling. One inmate, known only by the number X917, was admitted for minor war trauma. Within hours, he refused to eat, claiming the walls were hungry. Staff dismissed him as unstable. By the third day, his scribbles covered the walls of his cell: diagrams of impossible geometries, symbols that predate the Imperium, and coordinates to locations that do not exist. The Asylum took him into observation, and he was never seen again. Others speak in riddles, reciting history that predates human memory, whispering of corridors that breathe and ceilings that fold into infinity. They claim to hear the voices of the building itself, the Asylum murmuring secrets older than the Emperor's reign. A few have even claimed the Asylum communicates directly with them, promising freedom, but freedom in a way the human mind cannot comprehend, freedom that dissolves identity rather than restoring it. But the most terrifying aspect is what happens to the mind of someone who truly understands. They do not simply break, they transform. They retain awareness while their consciousness fragments into 1,000 streams, each tied to a piece of the Asylum. In some accounts, these transformed minds become oracles for the building, sent to guide new arrivals, lure the inquisitive, and ensure that no one ever leaves with complete understanding. And yet, a dangerous allure persists. Some who enter the Asylum do so willingly, drawn by a compulsion they cannot resist. They are fascinated by the whispers and the shifting architecture, seduced by the idea that there is knowledge hidden within the corridors. Few survive, and those who do emerge changed, with eyes too bright, smiles too calm, and voices that carry a strange echo of something else, something the Asylum has taken, absorbed, and returned. The Imperium suppresses these accounts, erases records, and classifies files to maintain the illusion of control. But word spreads. The haunted whispers of those who vanished, the hints left in abandoned logs, and the voices that sometimes bleed through Vox networks to unprepared listeners, all suggest a terrifying conclusion: the Asylum does not merely contain the insane. It cultivates the extraordinary. It teaches them. It feeds on their understanding. And it remembers them forever. Every patient who sees too much becomes a testament to the Asylum's will. They are warnings, lessons, and sometimes messengers. And the Imperium, for all its power, remains blind to the full scope of the threat, because those who might reveal it are invariably consumed, lost, or transformed before they can speak. For the rest of humanity, the lesson is chillingly clear: to look too closely is to vanish. And to vanish is only the beginning. It is a question no sane person dares to answer. And yet, for those trapped within the Imperial Sanatoria Correctionum, the truth is unavoidable. Patients whisper of corridors that murmur their deepest fears, rooms that recount forgotten sins, and ceilings that sigh with relief when someone finally breaks. The asylum is not silent. It listens, remembers, and speaks, not in words, but in sensations, impulses, and thoughts that invade the mind of anyone who stays too long. The whispers are subtle at first. A murmur behind a closed door. A shiver crawling along the spine. Faint echoes of voices long dead. Those who hear the asylum's first voice rarely understand it. It seems incoherent, random, perhaps the product of fevered minds. But to those who survive, if you can call it survival, the pattern emerges, the asylum communicates. The messages are not always direct. Sometimes it is a feeling, a sudden dread, a certainty that turning left will be the wrong choice. Sometimes it is an image, a vision of something so horrific it cannot exist, yet imprinted indelibly on the memory. Some patients swear the asylum can even anticipate their thoughts, responding before they act, guiding them, or punishing them, for daring to think independently. There are reports of patients hearing their own names whispered, even when alone. Some have claimed the asylum speaks in the voices of lost loved ones, drawing them toward areas that do not exist on any map. And every whisper carries a promise: safety for obedience, oblivion for resistance. Some say the asylum does not feed on the mind, it merges with it. Every patient adds to its awareness, every fear becomes another instrument of control, every memory a thread woven into the labyrinthine halls. By the time an inmate has been inside for weeks, the asylum knows them better than they know themselves. It can anticipate their reactions, manipulate their emotions, and erode their sense of self. And for those who return, if they return at all, the memory of the whispers does not fade. They carry fragments of the asylum in their minds. Dreams twist into hallucinations. Thoughts loop endlessly. And sometimes, in the quiet of the night, they hear it again, a soft, patient murmur, guiding, judging, always watching. The Imperium pretends these whispers are figments of madness. But every investigator who dares venture into the corridors knows better. The asylum speaks. It always has. And it will continue to speak long after the Imperium has forgotten it exists, because the asylum is patient, ancient, and infinitely aware. Those who listen too closely never escape the truth. The answer is far simpler, and far more horrifying, than the Imperium will ever admit. It is not the guards. It is not the doors. It is not even the demonic entities that may lurk in the shadows. The asylum itself is the prison. The patient is never contained by walls, cells, or restraints. They are contained by knowledge, by awareness, by understanding the terrible logic of the place. From the moment one crosses its threshold, the asylum begins a subtle, invisible process. It studies your fears, maps your memories, and reshapes your perceptions. The longer you remain, the more it becomes part of you, and the more you become part of it. Hallways stretch impossibly, doors vanish or appear, and rooms reorganize as if responding to your subconscious. The asylum is not static. It evolves, learns, and adapts to every attempt at resistance. Those few who return do so hollowed. Minds reconstructed, obedience installed, memories altered. They are shadows of the people who entered, messengers for something far older than the Imperium, emissaries for a force that feeds on the minds it touches. The others, those who refuse, those who scream, those who attempt escape, were absorbed. Their consciousness becomes another layer in the asylum's endless corridors, another whisper, another thread in the labyrinth. The most terrifying realization is this: the asylum is not bound by time or space. It exists simultaneously as a building, a network of psychic influence, and a predator stalking the minds of humanity. Even when a world falls, even when planets are purged or civilizations erased, the asylum persists. Its reach is infinite, its patience eternal. No one escapes, not because the Imperium is merciless, not because the warp is cruel, but because the Asylum does not release what it has claimed. It is not a prison in the traditional sense. It is a predator. It is patient. It is eternal. And it is always hungry. So the next time you hear whispers of missing soldiers, of citizens vanishing without record, or of those who return silent, obedient, and changed, remember this: it is not an accident. It is not negligence. It is inevitable. The Asylum does not make mistakes. It does not forgive. It does not release. And that is why no one ever leaves.